All right, let's talk about the NMJ or the neuromuscular junction. So first off, muscles or muscle cells have to be stimulated to contract. So the nerve that goes to the muscle is referred to as a somatic motor neuron. A somatic motor neuron. When we get into neurology, there are somatic sensory neurons that deal with the sensation, but motor is controlling movement for the most part. For the most part, somatic motor neurons. These are voluntary, but then again, we know skeletal muscle is voluntarily contracted. Where nerves and muscles connect, we call it the NMJ or the neuromuscular junction. So let's take a look here. We're going to get into some neurophysiology and muscle physiology here. So in this picture, in this diagram here on the upper left, we see a neuron, but this is the end of a neuron. When we look at the end of a neuron, the very end, we have these swollen tips called the axon terminal, and at the very end of the axon terminal, we have these end bulbs because they're swollen. So this is the axon. At the very end is the axon terminals, and at the end of the terminals are these bulbs called end bulbs. And what we have at the end bulbs are neurotransmitters. That's where neurotransmitters are stored. The primary neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction is called ACH. ACH stands for acetylcholine. Acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is always an excitatory neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction. Okay? Acetylcholine is an excitatory neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction. Okay, so remember, you have a neuron. The neuron has, let's say, the dendrites, the cell body, an axon, and at the end of the axon is the axon terminals. And at the end of the axon terminal are the end bulbs. What do we have stored in the end bulbs? Neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters can be excitatory or inhibitory, meaning they can turn on a switch or turn off a switch. In this particular case, at the neuromuscular junction, acetylcholine is turning on the switch for excitation. Excitation. All right, so now let's take a look at a close-up of the neuromuscular junction. So when we look at the right, we're going to take this section here in the box. If we take this box, part of it is going to be nerve, because it's part of the axon terminal, and the other part, the pink part here, is going to be the muscle or the end plate of the muscle. All right, so we have the nerve part, which is more like peach color. Then we have the pinkish color down here. So we're going to take this box, we're going to blow it up, and now we're looking at it down here on the lower left, where we have this portion here, which is the end of the axon, and then the pink part, which is the muscle. In between the nerve and the muscle is a cleft. They call it a synaptic cleft. That's the gap or the space between the nerve and the muscle. So right here in this yellowish region at the bottom, this is the synaptic cleft. Now, what do we see at the axon terminal or in the end bulb on the upper right? We see these small round vessels. And these vessels or vesicles contain neurotransmitters. What's the neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction? The synaptic vesicle contains acetylcholine. So we need some sort of messenger to tell the acetylcholine, hey, we want you to open up and release your contents, the contents being acetylcholine, into this space called the synaptic cleft. So the body is going to use a mineral called calcium. This is why calcium is so very, very important in terms of muscle contraction. So calcium comes in here, tells these vesicles to open up and release this neurotransmitter acetylcholine. So right here, number one, we see acetylcholine is released from the synaptic vesicle. And you should remember by this point The method of release is what we call exocytosis. Whenever a vesicle opens up and releases its contents, we call it exocytosis. So acetylcholine, this neurotransmitter, is now moving into the synaptic cleft, and it's looking to bind to something on the motor side, on the muscle side, called the motor end plate. Now, the motor end plate has these channels or receptors. You see the green structures here. These are sodium channels, and they're shut. And they need something to say, open says me. So acetylcholine, let's say this is acetylcholine, it's going to bind to this sodium channel, and when it does, it opens up. Without that, it stays closed. So acetylcholine is released because of calcium. It's going to bind to this receptor or this channel, the sodium channel. It's going to open up. And if it's a sodium channel, it's going to allow sodium to rush in. So acetylcholine binds to this channel here, to this receptor, and you can see that it opens up. Acetylcholine binds to the acetylcholine receptor on this sodium channel, and sodium rushes in. And whenever sodium rushes into the cell, it's going to depolarize. That's a new term, depolarize. You should equate the term depolarization with action potential. You should equate the term action potential with nerve stimulation, right? Because they all are interrelated. Depolarization, action potential, sparking a nerve impulse to make the muscle contract. Okay? So here is a microscopic view of a neuromuscular junction. This is a somatic motor neuron. These are just axon collaterals coming off. And at the very end, right, here's the muscle. And at the very end, we have an axon terminal branching off into a synaptic end bulb. And in the end bulb is where we have those neurotransmitters. At the neuromuscular junction, that neurotransmitter is always acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is going to release that acetylcholine through exocytosis. What's going to stimulate that to open up is calcium. Calcium is involved here. It's an important mineral. Okay, so I'm going to pause here, and when I come back, we'll get into some of the important anatomical landmarks of what intrinsically is found deeper into that neuromuscular junction.